Good morning, everyone, and welcome to one more lesson, a weekly Torah portion. This week we're studying the portion of Naso, the year 5783. I am studying from the book Selections from Likutei Sichos, the first portion of Naso, the first talk of the Rebbe. This week's Torah portion actually is the largest Torah portion. It contains 176 verses. This year, for us, we're going to be studying it 2 weeks because Shavuot falls on Friday and Shabbat, tomorrow and Shabbat, and on Shabbat you read the holiday Torah portion. So on Sunday, we circle back to the beginning of Naso, and we read continuously until the following Shabbat. In Israel, it's one day Shavuot, so Friday is a holiday, Shabbat is a regular Shabbat. So they're going to be 1 week ahead of the game than we are. That's number one. Number two, it contains a lot of commandments. Most notably is the dedication of the temple by the 12 tribes. Each one of them dedicated one day with spices, wagons, chariots, balls, sacrifices. And the only tribe that did not merited to dedicate is the Levite tribe, and next week continues on that, next Torah portion. Another one we read about a Nazirite. A Nazirite is someone who accepts upon himself to sanctify himself and become a holy man. They do not cut their hair, they do not drink wine, they do not defile themselves to a dead corpse. They cannot touch a dead body or be under the same roof. Another, for how long? It depends. If it does not mention a number, it's for 30 days, a minimum 30 days. A person can accept for life. A person can accept for 60 days, for a year, for 6 months, for 5 years, until I have a child born to me, until my son gets married. There is whatever the stipulation is. We also read in this week's portion about Sotah, a woman, married woman who is secluded with a man after the husband warned her not to be secluded with that man. There are no eyewitnesses to testify that she sinned, but she will be coming to the temple. And there's a procedure, including a sacrifice, in which she will be found either guilty or non-guilty. In the middle, there are many other commandments. At the beginning of the portion is about the order of which they would carry the tabernacle, which was a temporary dwelling, to move it in the desert. Each one of the three families, Gershon, Kehat, and Merari, had a different assignment. Gershon and Merari carried the walls and the tapestry of the walls and all the structure. Kehat carries the actual furniture, so to say, the altars, the table, the menorah, the holy ark. And I spoke on Shabbat. It was a very difficult task. However, it was a very holy task. They are the only one who did not receive any assistance with carrying. They had to carry it on their shoulders. Because they were assigned that furniture, they cannot put it on wagons. The Gershon and Merari did receive wagons and balls to carry, to move with the wagons. And that's going to be the topic of our discussion today, those wagons. So we begin. This week's Torah reading states the following, and by the way, this is at the start of the portion. It came to pass on the day that Moshe finished erecting the sanctuary, he anointed it and sanctified it. The Nesi'im of Israel, the leaders of Israel, brought an offering. They brought their offering before God, 6 covered wagons and 12 oxen, a wagon for every 2 Nesi'im, and an ox for each one. And they presented them in front of the sanctuary. So as they begin to dedicate the temple, each one would bring spices and a sacrifice on their day. But before, they joined together in a gift. What's the gift? 6 wagons. Each one paid for half a wagon. and 12 oxen, one leader, one ox, and those 12 oxen are very strong, very heavily built. They came from Texas, most likely, and they were able to carry, those days they did not have the horse, you cannot harness to carry very strong. Also, the horse can start running. Horses are much less tame. Oxen are very strong, and they can pull and move slowly as the crowd, the entire community, 3 million people are walking. They were surrounded by the Jewish people. So they had 12 oxen, one for each tribe. They had 6 wagons, half for each tribe. I'm sure the question I hope that arises in your head is, why did they donate a half a wagon? What's wrong with a complete wagon? Why couldn't they bring 24 oxen and 12 wagons? There is a difficulty with this narrative. When asked to donate towards the sanctuary, the Jewish people responded with abundant generosity. I'm sure you know that they were so well giving. So ask the Rebbe, when God allowed the Jewish people to build a sanctuary, they were so fervently looking forward to it that in 3 days, they had to stop. They had to cause, this is the only fundraising campaign that had achieved its goal. Any charity campaign, they always would come up with a new project, even if you pay them. I had somebody in Jerusalem, I was coming out of a wedding. Sure. What?
In Israel, the guy asked for some money.
Says the Rebbe, when it came to the temple, they had too much that they were forced to stop. Therefore, as the Rebbe, furthermore, the Jewish people responded with abundant generosity to the point where the donations were sufficient, and indeed there was more than enough. So why then were the Nesi'im, the leaders of each tribe, so constrained in their donations of the wagons, each one giving no more than half a wagon for each 2 Nesi'im? How is it possible that they gave a half? Give the whole thing. Furthermore, the Sifri, the Medrash of Sifri, and the Medrash quoted by Rashi describe what motivated the Nesi'im to offer these donations. What happened here? I'm sure you heard that they were last to bring because they would assume that the Jewish people will not complete the giving and they will make up because they are very wealthy. So they waited for everyone, and whatever is left not to be, by the time they realized it was too late because the Jewish people have bought everything. Here is the Medrash. What prompted the Nesi'im to be the first to donate for the dedication of the altar, when by contrast they were not the first to donate for the work of the constructing of the sanctuary, the Nesi'im had said, let the community donate what they will donate, and if they leave anything lacking, we will complete it. Since they saw the community had completed donating everything, as it is written, and the work was sufficient, the Nesi'im said, what is left for us to do now? Therefore, they bought the shoam stones and the stones to be mounted on the ephod and the rest in the breastplate. For this reason, they donated first in this instance. When it came to the building of the temple, they waited last because they figured there will be a lot needed. It turned out everybody did whatever. So what's left? The breastplate stones and the ephod stones. There were large stones on the shoulders of the high priest. Now, when it comes to the actual dedication of the temple, not the construction, dedication, they said we're going to be first. So we will do a large gift because we are important. We always get the first choice. If so, as the Rebbe, in other words, The donations the Nessim brought on the day Moshe completed the erection of the sanctuary were intended to rectify the fact that they did not donate in a sufficiently eager and liberal manner originally. With these donations of the wagons and oxen, they are sought to express their generosity for the sanctuary in a desirable and complete manner. But how did they do this? By each Nasi bringing only half a wagon. Now they're trying to rectify that they didn't do good, and so therefore they're going to be very generous and very kind and be the first. And all they do is a half a wagon. Times are tough, huh? There is a further point, one that is of even greater need of clarification, as is evident from a straightforward reading of the verses, and as explicitly stated in the Medrash. The Nesiim bought the 6 covered wagons and 12 oxen to transport the sanctuary. Indeed, these donations were actually used for this purpose. As the Torah explicitly states, Moshe divided the wagons among the families of the Levites as was necessary according to the service. 2 wagons and 4 oxen for the descendants of Gershom, and 4 wagons and 8 oxen for the descendants of Merari. What's the purpose of the wagons and the oxen? The purpose is for transportation. They kept them in a barn until they needed them, and then they fed them well, and then they would carry throughout the 40 years. So he gave 4 wagons to Gershon and 8 wagons to Merari. As I mentioned at the start, Kehat that carried the actual furniture, no wagons. As the Rebbe, now, the Nesiim knew how many boards and pillars comprised the sanctuary and could have estimated the weight and that of 100 sockets, each one of which weighed a sanctified talent. The difficulty in transporting all the component parts of the sanctuary is magnified by the fact that according to the calculation of the Talmud, the length of a wagon was 5 cubits and the width of a wagon was 2.5 cubits. Accordingly, the boards had to be placed one on top of the other, 12 boards horizontally in 2 double stacks on each wagon, with a cubit of empty space between the double stacks. For this reason, a Levite had to follow the wagons, as we'll see the diagram in the next page, and pay attention that the boards did not shift position. And as Rashi explains, if necessary, fix the arrangements of boards one on top of the other so that the uppermost boards would not fall. And Rashi continue. Again, there were 20 and 20 boards. There were 10 amma. 10 amma is about 17 feet, 16, it's 18 inches. How much is 18 inches? 1.5 feet. How much is 1.5 feet? 18 inches? 18 inches. So they were 18. So they were 18 feet tall. 18 feet tall. They were 1 amma. 1 amma is 1.5 feet wide, and 2 amma, and 2 amma long. So there were 3 feet. Imagine a board of wood, 3 feet by 1.5. That's 18 feet tall. This is huge. It's an enormous number. Just a minute. The wagons were 5 cubits, 7.5 feet wide by 6 by 9 feet. So the boards first, before we get the difficulty, stuck out of the wagon on both ends. But in addition, there was only an 18-inch between the 2 boards. There were 2 boards before the stacks. They were expanding outside the wagons, almost like a third. And then they were stacked how many? 12 boards. 12 boards. So it was 12. Horizontally. Here is a board. 2 by 1, right? So they were sitting like that.
Which way is the wagon headed?
This,
out on the width of the length of
on the length, they were sticking out.
So they had one guy Levi's around in case shifted.
On both sides.
You have to be super strong there.
And I don't think they had one. I think they had many. But soon we'll get there. There were 12 boards meaning they are rising 18 feet high. It's just enormous. It's impossible to fathom. And what's the question?
Why they give such small wagons?
Why? Not just such
They
small.
do in advance. but
Not only such,
That's-
not, who says didn't tie them down?
they do
The
make
same
bigger
that
wagons.
tied
Why
down.
not? Yes.
Had to be tied down. Why didn't they
What?
get
Just
more
a minute.
weight?
12 stocks of 2. What's wrong with adding another 6 wagons? Make it 6 feet high.
Right.
Makes no sense. 12, 18 feet high. Just think about raising it and placing it. They did not have cranes. There was no Yossi cranes there.
Having driven RVs over bumpy roads, I'm thinking about, they didn't get very far.
No, but the
before
desert-
They had to go. stack
But
up
the
again.
desert was flat and clear. There was no issues.
They were paved.
What are you saying?
Understand?
Because Hashem made the cloud clear the desert. So that was a non-issue. There was no doubt there was miracles. The question is, why unnecessary? Why not add few wagons? You go to Stanley Glauser and you say, sell me some used wagons. They might have been short an oxen. Everything is possible. You see, they had 2 oxen for each wagon, which I think made sense. But the whole, just doesn't make sense. Now, you look at the,
2 miles of the oxen to get.
here is the photo. Here is the diagram. You see the diagram? So the wagon is the darker. Look how much they extend.
Wow.
It just doesn't make sense. And then on top of it, they had the sockets. The sockets were placed in the ground, made out of silver, extremely heavy to hold those wagons straight. They had to stack them up. They must have stacked them who knows how many. What's wrong? Donate a few more wagons and oxen. Yes, Harry.
I think that.
I just want you to know, I studied this when I lived in Half Moon Drive, which was 28 years ago. I was up at night. I had only 3 babies then. My in-laws were in the house and I stayed up and nobody would join me. And I studied this sikha and it was so geschmack that I still remember it today. I remember it like when I studied it. And I shared it on Shabbat and I realized that people did not get the point because they couldn't figure out the numbers. So here you have a diagram. It's wonderful that they did a diagram. That's why I'm very excited to study it, because it brings back old memories. Go ahead.
Nobody carried anything. It's carried itself.
It's all good and fine. I'm not going to dispute it. I can't argue with it. You know why? At the same time, God wanted us to do our share.
Right.
And what is our share? To have many more wagons. So therefore, they should have added a half a wagon. You know what? If each gave a wagon, I understand. They taking into account that they were lost previously and now they want to show off. Taking into account that they can give a complete and they give half, which is not the proper way to donate. When you give something, you give complete. And that's an example they share to give a half. Makes no sense.
So give them 24.
I would give them 48, I would make them give. Let's continue. Well, we...
In other words, the donation was seen, we're on page 62.
Which one?
Page 64, first 4 columns.
Okay, thank you. In other words, the donations the Nasim brought on the day Moshe completed the erection of the sanctuary were intended to rectify the fact that they did not donate a sufficiently eager and liberal manner originally. With these donations of the wagons and oxen, they sought to express their generosity for the sanctuary in a desirable and complete manner. But how did they do this? By each Nasi bringing only half a wagon? There is a further point, one that is of even greater need of clarification. As is evident from a straightforward reading of the verses and explicitly stated in the Medrash, the Nesi'im brought the 6 covered wagon and 12 oxen to transport the sanctuary Indeed, these donations were actually used for this purpose. As the Torah explicitly states, Moshe divided the wagons among the families of the Levites, as was necessary according to the service. 2 wagons and 4 oxen for the descendants of Gershon, and 4 wagons and 8 oxen for the descendants of Merari. Says the Rebbe. Now, we read that. The Nesim knew how many boards and pillars comprised the sanctuary and could have estimated their weight, and that of 100 sockets, each one of which weighed a sanctified talent. The difficulty in transporting all the components parts of the sanctuary is magnified by the fact that according to the calculation of the Talmud, the length of the wagons was 5 cubits, and the width of the wagons was 2.5 cubits. Accordingly, the boards had to be placed one on top of another, 12 boards horizontally in 2 double stacks on each wagon, with a cubit of empty space between the double stacks. For this reason, a Levi had to follow the wagons, as the diagram shows, and pay attention that the boards did not shift position. And as Rashi explained, if necessary, fix the arrangements of the boards one on top of the other, so that the upper boards would not fail. And Rashi continues. He would follow the wagon throughout the entire journey. When he would see boards slipping into the empty space between the stacks, in other words, they're slipping inwards, he would run to the place where the boards jutted out on the sides until he reached the cubit of empty space between the stacks. He would squeeze himself so that he could stand in the space of half a cubit between the sides of the wagons and the side of the public domain, until he would be able to return the boards that slips to its place in the arrangements. See the diagram on the bottom of the following page. In other words, there was 1 cubit, 18 inches space on the wagon between the 12 boards. When he sees some of them coming down, he would stick himself in. Now there is only about a half a cubit, which is 9 inches. You can stick yourself, a young man, in a 9-inch space.
It's gotta be really.
Was
dangerous place to be.
extremely dangerous.
Oh, my God.
Now, I think that but what I see from here is that they would not be worried about them falling off, but rather they would be in, because they tied them down. Once you tie them down, they can't slip out. So they came in. Even that, it can fall in and can cause havoc. So there would be a Levi in between there waiting, and as soon as they are shaking or moving in, he would go in, stack in, and start moving them.
If it was 18 feet high, the Levi only 6 feet tall.
He had a ladder. What's the
It
problem?
doesn't say to me anything about the ladder.
I'm telling you, I was there. Added,
We were all there. We were-
added to the board, added to the boards were the pillars and the sockets of the sanctuary. The 60 pillars of the courtyard, I told you 100, so there were 60. There were 20, 20, and 10, I believe. And the 60 brass sockets, we are on page 67. All of these articles had to be placed on but 4 wagons, 60 boards on 4 wagons. So it's 15 per wagon.
An even number.
Yeah. On the surface, this donation reflects the very opposite of the approach of generosity, abundance, and wealth that characterize the sanctuary and the Beis Hamikdash, concerning which our sages says, there is no room for an approach that bespeaks poverty in a place of wealth. When you have a $7 million mansion on Siesta Key, you are not going to be cheap on the gate. You're not going to be cheap on the plants. You're not going to be cheap on the stucco. You're not going to be cheap on the LED lights. There is a saying in the Talmud, there is no room for poverty expression in a place of richness or wealth. So we are dealing with the Holy Temple. We're dealing with contributions in the highest level possible. And yet, when it comes to the wagon, it seemed to be beyond poverty. It's like so stingy and saving yourself For what? Another 12 oxen, another 6 wagons? And especially that they bought half each. Were there to have been more wagons, it would not have been necessary to stack so many boats, one on top of the other. And the Levites would have been spared the effort of paying attention to the boards of the sanctuary throughout the entire time the boards were being transported. Says the Rabbi, double the amount, you lower the height by half, you have no issues, and you don't have somebody continuously watching. Did you understand the question? So I have 2 questions to summarize. One, why suddenly they bring only half if they want to show their generosity and be first to atone for being late last time? 2, if you talk about the temple where everybody did so well that they needed to be stacked, how come the leaders who serves as an example are the ones to bring only half a wagon where it's being used for something that required a lot more? Number 2. The Rebbe says, maybe I'm going to give you a summary of the next section. The Rebbe says, maybe the reason is because in the desert, they had gold, they had silver, they had precious stones, but they didn't have wood. There's no trees. So wood is a very expensive commodity, the most expensive commodity in the desert. And therefore, they had to be extremely rational about the wood. And therefore, they couldn't build more than 6 wagons. Says the Rebbe, it doesn't make sense. Because at the end of the day, the wood that they built the temple were not purchased by neighbors. They bought them from Egypt. If anybody is familiar, we studied acacia wood they bought out when they left Egypt. They bought with them, some of them were 80 feet long. A very, very elaborate, very expensive wood they bought with them in Egypt. Says Rabbi, few more stocks, you place an order on Home Depot, they deliver it to you and you carry it and you journey out. So it cannot be the reason that there was shortage of wood. That's the point. Yes, Harry?
No, you often mentioned that they used to buy from surrounding tribes out in the desert or stores or whatever, they used to buy things from elsewhere, no?
So says, the Rebbe says, finally, the Rebbe says, note also our sage statement on page 69 top. Note also our sage statement that certain items were purchased from the non-Jewish merchants who passed through the desert. It was very common for those merchants, Bedouins, to go around with their wares, selling them to other groups. So there is no shortage of wood. They could have purchased it from the nations, or they bought it as they bought in all the wood. They could have bought Egypt, yeah.
They had wagons to bring the wood.
Very good.
Okay, so where
were those wagons?
Where did the extra wagons come from? And where were they able to get extra wagons and why?
All right, so you're talking about something that we can answer. You know, the technology that existed then is all but forgotten. We don't know. One of the 10 wonders of the universe is the pyramids. We don't know how they built them, how they were so meticulous and how they raised stones so high. By the way, our great-great-grandfathers are the one who built them. They try to deny it, but these are the cities that we did. However, there are technologies that existed then that we don't have, medicine, embalments that they did then that we don't know today. Today, they don't know how they were able to do it. So wagons, we can explain that those days, because they were so well trained in craftsmen and engineering, they were able to do that. But it bothers the Rebbe that only half a wagon per tribe, there must be a specific purpose. And that's the point. In other words, regardless if they had extra, regardless if they knew how to do it, it doesn't matter. When you deal about such great wealth and a wealthy structure, you must have appropriate. It's like building a house with no storage and say nobody is sleeping there, no guest is going to look at the storage area. It doesn't work like that. When I built a house, I called many friends. They told me, never underestimate the amount of storage you need. Always double the amount you think you want. You know what? I have very little storage in my house today, even though I doubled, and I really did storage. at the end of the day, we learned that storage is the key. Here, we had to convert 2 classrooms into storage, even though they were classrooms, simply because there is no enough storage. You cannot say, I'm going to skip storage because I can use it for another bedroom. It doesn't work. If you're dealing with a very wealthy project, it has to come with all the accompanying help, and that includes wagons.
Maybe it's the half wagon is because this would ensure that no tribe could stand alone. They had to work together in order to.
That's a very good point.
In order to get.
But why does that express itself in the wagon? You're getting along. It's a very good point.
Did you see we're just getting even with the Levites?
Mhm.
Because Levites got stuff that they didn't do.
No, but.
It's a good point that they are joint project, right? That's the point. It's a very good point. That's part of the answer. But what's missing is why the wagons. They can join with other things. By the way, everything they bought, the balls they bought together.
Every gift. was
They bought a
exactly the
gift. They bought a gift of 12 oxen together. Then every day somebody else bought a sacrifices or spices. But the 12 oxen and the 6 wagons they bought together. They could have bought 12 wagons. They could have bought 24. If it was up to me, I would say to them 48 wagons. The fact that half wagon makes no sense. Let's see what the Rebbe has to say. Okay. We're gonna continue reading, even though it's a side issues that I can summarize, but I'm afraid that it's an introduction to the answer. Number 3, Sifri, and similarly the matters derived from God's command to Moshe, take the offerings from them, that the Nessim came to and stood before the sanctuary with the wagons and oxen, but Moshe did not accept them from them until he was told by the Holy One, take them from them. Thus the Nessim understanding accorded with the sublime understanding. In other words, when they came, the Sifri, the Medrash said, they showed up with the gifts, and Moshe said, I'm sorry, I don't want it. Because we're dedicating the temple now. You want to bring sacrifice, I understand. Oxen, wagons, I don't want. God says to him, Kach me'itam. It's in the text. Take it from them, because what they did is exactly according to my desire. From this, it is apparent that the donation of the wagons, and as a matter of course, the number was dictated by divine wisdom. Therefore, there was no by chance. It's not because they ran out of wood or ran out of money, but that's the way God wanted, and he planted it in their heads. And so when they bought 6 wagons, a half each, is because that's exactly what God wanted. Similarly, the sacrifices that the Nesiim brought for the dedication of the altar as a contribution, as a continuation of the donations, included several details that were unique, divinely directive specifically for that time, as spelled out by our sages and also by Rashi. For example, an incense offering bought by a private individual was offered on the outer altar, something that was never repeated again. It can be assumed that such a unique directive came in accordance with Moshe's agreement and God's wisdom. There was other details that what they did was only one time and never to be repeated. One example, says the Rebbe, spices. Bringing spices in temple is done only by whom? The high priest. Remember when Korach, in few weeks we're going to read, Korach and his men disputed Aaron's leadership, and Aaron says, go bring spices, but make sure you know that tomorrow you won't be dead. And they all bought, all the 12 bought in, all the 250 bought spices, and they all died because of that, except that. In other words, someone who brings spices is called a strange spice, and he's going to be put to death. In addition, the spices had to be bought on the outer altar, the big altar, and the spices usually are bought at the small golden altar. This is one time God allowed the leaders to bring spices. It never happened again. And this is one time God allowed it to be on the outer altar, not on the inside, because an Israelite is not allowed to enter into that place and do it. So we see, and there was other, they bought sin offering. A sin offering does not apply unless you committed a sin. They did not commit any sin. There was other unusual behavior that applied then. All because God agreed that for the dedication of the temple, so to say, he gave them a pass. He gave them one-time exception.
So there's no answer to the reason for the 6.
We're getting there. This is the
Not
introduction.
Not yet.
True, the Nesi'im offered the sacrifices on their own initiative, and Moshe did not accept them until he was instructed to do so by God. Nevertheless, it is clearly understood that when God told Moshe, they shall bring their offerings for the dedication of the altar, the offerings were brought based on God's command. Similar concepts apply regarding the donations of the wagon. Says the Rebbe, there is no way I'm going to give summary because we're getting to the end of our allotted time. Says the Rebbe, the same applies to the wagons. When they decided to bring a half each together, totally 6, it was divinely directed, and that's the way God wanted it because of a specific reason. And says the Rebbe, the Rebbe goes on to explain the following. The giving of the 6 wagons are considered sacrifices. It says at the beginning when they brought it, it says, Vayakrivu anesiim et korbonam lifnei hamizbeach. And they brought a sacrifice before the altar, and God says to Moshe, take from them and let it be a service of God. In other words, bringing the wagons, bringing the oxen are considered sacrifices. Sacrifice is not necessarily slaughtering an animal. As we know, flour, oil, libation is also a sacrifice. This time, the wagons are sacrifices. What's so unique about sacrifices, says the Rebbe? It is uniquely that there is no extra. You cannot bring a bigger animal or a different animal. You have to be specific to the instruction God is giving for a specific sacrifice. What happened if someone left over a food from not finishing the sacrifices of Passover or any sacrifice to be consumed? What happened to it? Has to be burnt. Why? It is forbidden to be around, because in the temple, as part of the wealth or the richness or the greatness is that everything has to be meticulously punctual in time, space, and body, so to say. Therefore, says the Rebbe, that the wagons are the one that always, anytime they moved around, completed the sanctuary, because without wagons, they couldn't move the wood, and they did not arrive in a location where God wanted it to be. So it's part of the temple. It's a sacrifice that is going to be part of the temple forever. Every time they move and they need to erect it anew, what do they need the first? Before the furniture comes, they need those wagons to deliver the wood. Now, says the Rebbe, now we can understand. I'm reading now very quickly on page 75. Based on the above, it is understood that although the approach that characterized the sanctuary and the Beit HaMikdash was one of wealth and bounty, there was not a single entity of detail that was not used for a specific action or purpose. There was no extra. They didn't have 2 tables. They didn't have a bigger table. They had to be specific. And therefore, the wagons are allowed to be only to its maximum use. And if it is used not to its maximum possibility, then it's superfluous, it's extra. That does not apply to a very wealthy place. And therefore, the maximum you can stack up on the altar, on the wagon, would be 12 beams. And therefore, 12 beams times 2, even though some of it is spilling over on all sides, that's the way to be done. Because there was a possibility like that, you're not allowed to add not even 1 wagon. And that's why I gave 2 wagons to Gershom and 4 wagons to Merari, because they needed to devise a plan where the maximum use be benefited from those wagons. Otherwise, it's extra, and extra is not acceptable in the temple. Joe, even though it was extremely heavy, I think today they would need a diesel engine to carry it. And says the Rebbe, that's why the other bowls and other utensils they bought, they had to weigh them one by one, then they had to weigh them all together, and they had to have the same weight, even though it's very unusual. But they had to be meticulously very, very perfect. Because when you bring to the temple, there are no extras. It cannot be 2 more grams. It cannot be 1 gram less. And the Rebbe is going to go on to explain that it shows us the universe. This is the point I wanted to get. The universe is a sanctuary. We as leaders, we are the Nasi, the leaders of the universe, of all the humanity. When we bring a gift to the temple, it has to be perfectly, and it cannot be wasted. So if God gives us the ability, the fact that we have extra time doesn't mean that we have to sit by the beach and do nothing, but rather reach out and inspire others to do good, just like they had to join together in order for them to fulfill the mitzvah of bringing the wagons. And this pretty much sums it in the short amount of time that we have. Thank you very much. Have a happy Shavuot.